My name is Marlene Sincaglia. I'm a league-trained moderator from the League of Women Voters of Berkeley Heights, New Providence, and Summit, which happens to be in the 7th Congressional District. I want to make this perfectly clear that I may not vote in this election. Therefore, I can be a moderator here. On behalf of the Township of Ocean League of Women Voters, I welcome you all to this forum. The League of Women Voters of New Jersey is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. Elections and voting are core concerns for the League of Women Voters. Year in and year out, leagues are committed to providing fact-based information about issues and the positions candidates take on those issues to help voters make their own decisions and participate in the electoral process. The League of Women Voters never supports or opposes candidates for office or political parties. Any use of the league name or of footage from the debate in campaign materials, literature, or advertising of any kind, including internet, cable, or television, has not been authorized by the League of Women Voters. We have one videographer, reporter, and he is our reporter of record. As a courtesy to the candidates, please turn off all cell phones and other electronic devices now. Please refrain from taking photographs during the debate. This is a forum devoted to hearing the views only of the candidates running for the 6th Congressional District federal position. To ensure that the meeting is as informative as possible, we ask that everyone abide by the following. Audience questions must follow league policy of being concerned with issues, not personalities. So that we can move along in the time allotted and hear equally from each candidate, we ask that you hold your applause until the end of the forum. Audience questioners should use the cards provided to write down their questions. A question could be directed to one of the candidates, but both candidates have the right to answer those questions. And the questions should address only those issues that come before the Congress of the United States. We already received one question, but it has to do with our state of New Jersey legislature. So therefore that question will not be asked of these candidates because they will have nothing to do with that particular issue. Okay, so we drew 4 positions for opening statements, and Mr. Pallone will be the first person to give his opening statement. And the opening statements are 3 minutes in duration, or up to 3 minutes in duration. Now we have timers in front, and what the timers do is they will hold up a yellow card when you have 30 seconds left, and then the red card when time is up. I will allow you to finish your thought, and then that is it. We move on to the next question. Okay? So 3-minute opening statement, Mr. Pallone.
Thank you. Is that good? Okay. Thank you. Let me thank the League of Women Voters, first of all, for sponsoring this debate, and I want to thank the Portuguese Sporting Club for letting us use the hall. And I did notice as I came in that it's been renovated. It looks great. I also wanted to thank some of our elected officials who are here. I see Assemblywoman Javahn Lopez is here. We have some of the council people from Perth Amboy. I saw our council president, Joel Pallone, is back there, and Councilman Fernando Irizarry, Councilman Helman Cabo is here, and I think I also saw a former councilwoman, Lisa Manta is here too. So thank you all, and for being here. I want to say, of course I'm the incumbent, and you would say to yourself, well, why do you want to be reelected? And it really is because I still think that I can make a difference. When I was first elected many years ago, I ran for Congress because I thought it could make a difference in people's lives, and this was the best way to do it. And I still feel that way. Just as an example of some of the things that I think have made a difference, one is with the Affordable Care Act. or some people call it Obamacare, which we passed about 6 or 7 years ago, and I was one of the drafters of it. And until President Trump came along, we were up to about 95% of the people in this country had health insurance for the first time. And so I'm very proud of that because I think it made a difference in people's lives. Another one is on the environment. When I started out many years ago, we had 12 ocean dumping sites off the coast of New Jersey. And I proceeded in Congress to close every one of them. And so now the beaches are fairly clean. They're not perfect, but they're certainly a lot better than they were then. So for me, the opportunity to make a difference in terms of environment, healthcare, so many issues is still very important. And I think I can do even more now, in part because we have President Trump in office who's proceeding to try to tear down most of the things that I care about. Obviously tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act, is proceeding to tear down all environmental regulation, and so many other things. And so I really feel right now there's even more of an opportunity to make sure that we have someone in Washington who's really going to try to protect our health, our environment, and so many other issues. And of course, if you've been in Congress a few years, you get seniority. And so now I'm the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee that has jurisdiction over so many of these issues. And if we take the majority, I think we will, I'll be the chairman. And so I'll even be in a better position to try to make a difference. So I'll leave it at that and obviously ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Walker.
I'd first like to say thank you to Representative Pallone for agreeing to meet me with this debate tonight. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters as well as the Portuguese Sporting Club for facilitating this debate. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming here to listen to me as well as Representative Pallone talk about the key issues that are affecting you every day. So I'd just like to let you know and ask, what are the odds that 85% of the US population believes that Congress is broken and is not working? Yet over 90% of the time that incumbents run for re-election, that they end up becoming the same politicians. My opponent tonight is running for the 15th term, which will equal 30 years. And I believe that if we really want to change the government, we have to change it from within. And the first way that we do it is within the 6th Congressional District. I would ask that you look at your lives and the lives of those around you. Healthcare is still a privilege, not a right. You've seen the wealthy get huge tax cuts while you continue to pay more, if not a lot more. Jobs are still being shipped overseas because of greedy Washington political insiders, as well as CEOs that make it happen. Women are still being underpaid than men for the same work that they're doing. Kids are still going to school if they're not afraid to go to school already and they're getting shot up by people that should not have assault weapons as well as bump stocks. Congress is just not working and these problems should have been solved by now. Our elected officials have been telling us for decades that they're working to solve these problems and we have not seen the solutions yet. Well, it stops now. I'm not the problem, I believe that I am the solution. Along with Representative Pallone tonight, we will be debating key issues. And the key issues being discussed affect you every day, and you deserve to hear the possible solutions on how to solve these problems. Tonight, you will decide whether you want to hear the same playbook by Washington insiders, or you want to hear new solutions by newer candidates. With my campaign as an example, we are no longer going to stand by and watch our elected officials work with the powers that work against us. I do not follow or believe in the status quo, and I believe that change is good, and in our political landscape today, change is necessary. And our change, again, starts within the 6th Congressional District tonight.
Thank you. We will begin the second part of our program, which are the questions. Now, throughout the evening, if you have a question, you need a card, raise your hand. There'll be people around passing out cards. You write your question on the card. Please be sure it's in the form of a question. And also, again, please be sure that it has to do with federal issues. In this section, the candidates get 2 minutes to respond to the questions. And we have the first question, and Mr. Walker, you get to answer this first. And the question asks, if elected, will you vote to impeach the President of the United States? And if so, why?
If elected into office, I guarantee that I will be the one to vote yes on impeaching President Donald Trump. I believe that the reason for him removing James Comey from the FBI director role is a reason why he should be voted by I believe that's why he should be impeached for obstruction of justice, as well as the reasons for him going on Twitter and social media saying that because of tapes and because of what James Comey and because of Robert Mueller, what they're working towards, he's trying to remove anybody possible to get to the bottom of why he ran for office and why he won the election. I don't think with Representative Pelosi and the Democratic incumbent and established back candidates, I don't think that they're that serious with impeaching Donald Trump. And a couple weeks ago, Representative Pelosi said that if the Democrats win back Congress, she doesn't think that it will help the country. It will further divide the country. So I think that with what Donald Trump has been doing in office since he's become president, it's very serious that we impeach him and try to preserve our democracy.
Thank you. Mr. Pallone.
Well, I've already actually voted that way. We had a motion by Al Green, who's a representative from Texas, to proceed to articles of impeachment, and then it was tabled by the Republicans, and I was one of the ones that voted against tabling it. So if that tabling motion had failed, we would actually have proceeded to impeachment. But I will say this, that I do think that Representative Pelosi makes a point, and I think her point isn't that we shouldn't impeach the president, but rather that we shouldn't focus on that. In other words, that if the Democrats take the majority, that it's very important for them to actually do things that would make a difference again in people's lives, which is what I said in my opening statement, and that there's so much work to be done. I mean, just as an example, I mentioned the Affordable Care Act. We need to shore up the Affordable Care Act, and I actually have a bill that would stabilize and make the Affordable Care Act better. We have to bring back net neutrality, which has been repealed by the Republicans, and protect privacy. We should have a major infrastructure bill. We have a bill called the Lift America Act that would provide for a major infrastructure program to get people back to work. So I think that Nancy Pelosi is right when she says that if we're in the majority, yes, we will vote to impeach the president, particularly if even more information comes out to show that he should be impeached. But I don't think that we should focus on that. The focus has to be on making a difference in people's lives, creating jobs, making sure they have good benefits in health care, and so many other things of that nature.
Thank you. Question number 2, Mr. Pallone, you'll be answering this one first. Is the DACA program still enforced?
Well, it is, but only because of the courts. In other words, the president said, or issued a executive order, I guess about 6 months ago now, that said that as of March it would be repealed. And so the Dreamers, but for action taken in court, would no longer, would go back to undocumented status and wouldn't be theoretically allowed to stay here. So I think it's important that we pass a bill that makes sure that the Dreamers can stay, have a pathway to citizenship. There's actually a discharge petition now that I think is only 5 votes short that would require that a bill that do that, that keep the Dreamers here, let them become citizens, have a pathway to citizenship. And if we can get 5 Republicans who haven't signed on to that discharge petition to do so over the next few weeks, and I think it's a real possibility, then we can bring up a bill that would protect the Dreamers, which I think is very important.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, same question.
I believe that DACA is being enforced because of, like Representative Pallone said, that the courts are upholding it. There are several lawsuits that are upholding DACA, and we need to continue supporting those courts that are supporting DACA itself. With President Trump saying that DACA should be ended as of March as the expiration date, I think that there should be a lot of congressional legislation being brought up, being written, and being approved by the congressional members that we elect to represent us in Washington. There are millions of people that are undocumented immigrants, and they need Congress to work together to be able to work towards getting green cards, getting citizenship, whatever possible. A lot of these people are hardworking Americans at heart, but because of the refusal of Congress to work together, they are not citizens and they don't have any hope of getting citizenship as of now. So with that said, I would like to say that if I were elected in a Congress, I would pass legislation, or at least bring up legislation that will require 5-year waiting periods from when one person applies for DACA so that they can become citizens at the end of the 5 years. It's way too difficult for a lot of these people to become naturalized citizens because it takes money and it takes a lot of time and patience. I have a lot of friends that have waited 10 to 15 years to get citizenship, and because of the congressional laws now regarding immigration, they don't have any chance of getting citizenship anytime soon.
Thank you. Next question. And Mr. Pallone, you're going to answer this one first, and it states, how do you feel, or what are your thoughts on sending aid to Puerto Rico for Maria relief? And how do you plan on helping Puerto Rican residents who moved here post-Hurricane Maria?
Well, the problem is that the Trump administration, I know we always blame the president, but in this case he deserves it, has not done enough. In other words, the package that has been approved, the aid that he's put forward has been minimal. And so you still have a lot of people in Puerto Rico who don't have power. You have a lot of people who lost their jobs or haven't been able to go back to their jobs. You still have schools and hospitals that are closed and are working, only half time, if you will. And so a lot more needs to be done. Now, our committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, we actually went down to Puerto Rico primarily to look at the electricity grid, which is a huge problem because the grid is very old and it needs to be not just rebuilt, but replaced, frankly. And so we did pass legislation that provided some help, but it's not enough. I think if the Democrats were in the majority, we would pass a much more robust bill that would, build a new grid and address some of these other concerns that I mentioned. But the Trump administration just doesn't care. I mean, I remember a few weeks before we went to Puerto Rico as a committee, I saw that image of him like throwing paper towels at the crowd or something. I never saw anything so ridiculous in my life. And when we came back, we had some hearings. We actually even had a forum here in Perth Amboy to talk about it. But a lot more needs to be done, and a big part of this is the Republican leadership and the president just not doing enough to address the problems.
Mr. Walker, same question.
I believe that we should be sending significant aid to the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Regardless of the state status or citizenship status of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, there are American citizens living in Puerto Rico. I think that the first answer that we should have is to send immediate aid to Puerto Rico, but also I think I would have to put a lot of blame on congressional leadership as to why Puerto Rico has not been admitted as a 51st U.S. state. If it was admitted as a U.S. state, they would already be relief packages just like Hurricane Sandy and other hurricanes that have afflicted the areas. So along with that, along with repairing the electrical grid, there are thousands of Puerto Ricans that can't go to work, that don't have running water, that don't have any houses to live in or any type of housing. A significant amount of money needs to be sent to Puerto Rico in order to improve these people's lives.
I just want to go back to the second part of that question and give you some time to respond to that. And that is, how do you plan on helping the Puerto Rican residents who moved to the States, who maybe moved here to Perth Amboy post-Hurricane Maria? And Mr. Walker, you have your 2 minutes to answer that question.
So I think that we have to significantly also expand the programs allotted to the people that were affected by Puerto Rico. Definitely by the Trump administration, there is not enough care being shown to the Puerto Rican citizens, U.S. citizens at that, as well as the island of Puerto Rico. We need to make sure that Puerto Ricans that are coming here, basically as refugees because the U.S. government does not care enough for us to help them out. So I think that there should be jobs programs, there should also be housing programs for these afflicted people.
Mr. Pallone.
Well, I think one of the things that's been suggested, and I would support, would be to give the municipalities like Perth Amboy some help. In other words, when somebody from Puerto Rico comes here to Perth Amboy, oftentimes they'll have little children and have to go to schools, and so that creates more of a burden for the school system. So one option might be to provide assistance to the municipalities, with extra aid, if you will, to pay for the additional cost of their schools or additional municipal services. But on the other hand, I want you to understand that we also, I'm not suggesting that people that come here should, I mean, obviously it's their choice, they're US citizens if they want to stay here or come back. But I want people to be able to go back to Puerto Rico, so we can't just focus on Puerto Ricans that come here. We also have to try to make Puerto Rico improve so that if they decide they would like to go back, that they can.
Thank you. Okay, next question. What is DUH? Demand Universal Health Care. And Mr. Pallone, you get to answer that first.
Well, we had hoped with Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, that we would come very close to universal health care. And before Trump came into office, we were at 95%. 95% of Americans had health care, health insurance. But we did leave out, not because of me, I wanted to include it, the undocumented. Undocumented are not included, and a big part of that 5% was the undocumented. So I think that the answer is, if we're in the majority, I mean, right now, all we have to do is, try to prevent President Trump from doing more damage to the Affordable Care Act. I mean, every day he does damage, so you don't have to buy health insurance anymore. You don't have the cost-sharing subsidies. You don't have to have an essential benefit plan. The list goes on. But my bill, which is the Modernization Act, would basically say that we would eliminate the cap on people who are eligible for subsidies, so everyone would be eligible for a subsidy. There'd be more generous subsidies for people, and for everyone who is now eligible. You would be guaranteed an essential benefit package, so you would have good benefits, and we would bring back the cost-sharing subsidies that have been abolished by President Trump by executive order. And I think if you do those things, you will get, and if at some point you could also get health insurance for the undocumented, you'll get very close to 100%. Now, I know that my opponent is going to say that we should have a single-payer system, so I'm going to kind of say it in advance, which is that I've always supported a single-payer system, but I don't think we're going to get the votes for it in Congress. I don't think even with a Democratic majority we would have enough people to vote for it. We tried to do it last time, but we didn't have the votes, and so the Affordable Care Act was the compromise, and the best way is to shore it up and to make it better so that more and more people have health insurance, that we get as close to universal care coverage as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
So Demand Universal Health Care was an organization related to HR 676, which endorsed my campaign. I'm happy to announce that should I be elected into Congress, the first bill that I would co-sponsor is HR 676. Medicare for All means that the health insurance companies cannot provide the same health procedures that the US government would provide, and it would allow for a US government-run health insurance program. If we had that, just like every other major country in the world, everyone would be guaranteed health care. I ask for you to look at your premiums every month for your health insurance bills and ask if you're getting the best out of your money that you're paying for health insurance. The 95% of people that are insured, there are a lot of people that are uninsured, the 5%, and also there are people who are underinsured. These are the same people that pay high deductibles and can't get healthcare coverage that they badly need. If we had a US government-run health insurance program, everyone would be guaranteed healthcare. And as I said before, healthcare is a right and it's not a privilege. But I also like to ask you to look into your representation, regardless of your district or your state, and think about what kind of money are they getting the donations from. Is it the health insurance companies? Is it the pharmaceutical companies? Those are the same companies that don't want HR 676 passed. And I believe that when we finally have people and representatives in office that aren't taking money from health insurance companies, then we can have healthcare and Medicare for all. It's the best system possible. People can keep money in their pockets. They don't have to be surrounded by different doctors and different people telling them that they're not gonna have health insurance or that they cannot get health insurance. There are thousands and millions of people every day that have to file bankruptcy because of medical bills. It's a profit-driven system, and the best way that we can do it is by guaranteeing Medicare for all. We cannot keep the system as is.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Mr. Walker, how do you propose to help an urban area like Perth Amboy as a congressman?
I think the best thing that we can do is to provide jobs for the people of Perth Amboy. Now, me coming up, I know that there were a lot of people that did not have anything to do all day and they end up getting in trouble. I'm not saying that about the people of Perth Amboy, but I believe that when people are busy, then that makes it more productive for the city. So whether it's by infrastructure, whether it's by clean energy, there are many ways that we can put people back to work. And when people are back to work, it makes for higher productivity within cities.
Okay, now, Mr. Pallone, your question
Oh, you-
was,
Oh, you,
it was, the
respond
person,
to that too, right?
oh, well, you can add that to your answer if you want, but the person who wrote the question said that for you was to list the accomplishments that you have provided or that have helped Perth Amboy.
Well, let me respond to the first one and say that I agree that infrastructure and creating jobs, I think the best way to create jobs is through a major infrastructure initiative. As you know, both in the presidential campaign, both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump promised a major infrastructure initiative, but of course Trump never delivered on it. Instead of putting up federal dollars, he said the state and local government should pay for it, which is not going to happen because they don't have the money. So what the Democrats have proposed, and part of that has been the Lift America Act that I put forward at our committee, would be like a $1 trillion infrastructure initiative. And within that, within the Energy and Commerce jurisdiction, which is my committee, we would have upgrades to electricity grid, we would have major brownfields and Superfund funding to clean up toxic waste sites. We would have a major safe drinking water initiative. And these are the kind of things that would help. I mean, we did a press conference with Mayor Diaz, I guess about a year ago, where she got some money from the existing Safe Drinking Water Act to upgrade the pipes in the cities. Not only here, but around the state, many of these pipes are very old. So that puts people back to work. If you have major cleanup brownfield sites, not only does that clean up sites, but it makes it possible to put in new industrial development at those old sites that once they get cleaned up. And of course, there's the transportation infrastructure, so many other things. You know, in terms of, you know, what I've accomplished, I mean, one of the things that I would talk about is in the aftermath of Sandy, you know, we had the whole waterfront that was completely destroyed, and we worked with the mayor and council here to get the funding to reconstruct the waterfront, to put the package together to get the money for that, and it looks great today, so I'll mention that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question happens to be, how would you address the infrastructure issue? And you've already started talking about that. Mr. Pallone, if you want to add something to what you had said about specifically infrastructure.
Well, what I want you to understand is that the only way that this is going to happen is if there's federal dollars, right? The states don't have the money. Obviously, the towns don't have the money. As much as you work hard to, you know, to do the right thing, money just isn't there. And so what we've been saying, you know, when I say we, I'm talking about myself and the Democratic caucus, is that we would take half of the, you know, when the Republicans did the tax plan, which was a disaster for New Jersey, they reduced the corporate tax significantly. So what we're saying is we would take about half of that corporate tax cut and bring it back, in other words, raise the tax on corporations. And part of that would be used for this $1.5 trillion infrastructure initiative, which would have all the major components. It would have transportation, mass transit, roads. It would have broadband for underserved areas. It would have brownfields. It would have hospital construction, electricity grid, many of the things that I already mentioned. And then the rest of the money that we would capture from increasing the corporate tax, we would use to give back the deductibility. Because as you know, this GOP tax plan really hurt New Jersey because you only have $10,000 deductibility. And if your property taxes and your income taxes and your sales taxes go above that, you can't deduct it anymore. And that's really going to hurt New Jersey. So, but a big part of that money that would be recaptured from raising the corporate tax would go to an infrastructure initiative.
Mr. Walker, the same question about how would you address the infrastructure issue?
So I believe that our infrastructure has to be greatly improved among many different sects within the state of New Jersey as well as in this district. The roads, the transit system, it's old and it's decrepit. A lot of the bridges are crumbling. I remember a couple weeks ago, it was a bridge in Burlington, and one of the pieces of cement actually fell down, and that's when the DOT actually solved the problem. It seems as though that the way that our government is run, our transit system is run, is that things have to really be bad for the government to help us out, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. I commute into Manhattan every day for work, and I pay $393 a month to New Jersey Transit, and I get on an old train that's from the 70s and 80s, and sometimes I can't even get into Penn Station because of New York City tunnels that are 100 years old, and they're still old and decrepit from the damage from Hurricane Sandy. It is ridiculous that we have these problems and people have to wait dozens of minutes in the train because of the refusal of Washington to pass a transportation bill to get things done. There have been many different majorities in Congress, and it seems as though that we're still the people that are going to be paying this. We have a gas tax that's higher. We already pay enough taxes and don't see how it affects the roads and how we have potholes that aren't being filled up. People are paying thousands of dollars out of pocket behind enough potholes in the road where it messes up our cars. We have old transit cars. We have tunnels in Manhattan that aren't being fixed. There are many different problems within infrastructure, and I know that we need new leadership and we need new blood in Congress to officially get things done. We can't have political insiders telling us that they're going to help us out when we haven't been helped out yet.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Walker, you get the next question, and the question is, how do you feel about legalizing marijuana on the federal level?
I fully support in legalizing marijuana. And the first reason why I believe so is because of the social injustices that have come from it. There are millions of people every day that are being persecuted by a prejudiced and discriminatory criminal justice system that looks for people for possessing marijuana. They pay court fees, lawyer fees, they go to jail, they cannot get jobs because of the presence of marijuana on their criminal record. And I believe that it's an unjust system. Now, I believe that the reason for a lot of these crimes and a lot of this prejudiced criminal justice system is because of the 1994 crime bill, which my opponent supported. He voted yes on increasing mandatory minimum sentencing on marijuana-related convictions. So there are a lot of people that have become negatively affected since 1994 in regards to having possession of marijuana. And not just with the criminal aspect of it, but there are also herbal benefits to using marijuana rather than prescription pills that are killing up thousands of people within New Jersey every year. It's a serious problem for the suburbs and as well as the urban areas. The suburbs for the people that are dying every day from prescription pills, and for the urban areas that have the persons of color in the community negatively affected through the criminal justice system. People are persecuted and people are dying because of the representation within this district of refusing to legalize marijuana. And I will also add that the campaign contribution funds from certain pharmaceutical companies that pump up these kids and pump up doctors' revenues for prescribing so many drugs, these are the reasons why marijuana is not being legalized within this district. If we had a representative and we had senators that fully supported legalizing marijuana, then we can finally get rid of this criminal justice system that is prejudiced towards people of color, and we can finally have people not dying every day because of prescription drugs.
Thank you. Mr. Pallone.
Well, he's right that for many years I was opposed to the legalization of marijuana. That is true, and I guess part of it was my own, feeling growing up that it wasn't a good idea to legalize it. But I've changed my mind. A few years ago, I decided that for the very reasons that you mentioned, which is that it was discriminatory. So many young people, particularly people of color, were getting criminal records that were being used against them if they saw jobs, and the system was very unfair. And so I came around to being an advocate for legalization of marijuana, and for all the reasons that you said. I do think that one of the things that's happening right now, again, this is President Trump, is that the Attorney General is actually issued an order saying that he's going to go after states that legalize it, and that and try to use the federal government and the federal law as a way of trying to punish, if you will, states that have moved towards legalization. And so I do think that we need to change that. The federal law should say that marijuana is legal, and I would also support efforts at the state level by Governor Murphy, who of course has been a big advocate for legalizing marijuana.
Thank you. Next question. Mr. Pallone, you'll be answering this one first. What can Congress do about the rollback of environmental regulations at the EPA? A lot of damage is going on under the radar.
Well, I think this is one of the biggest problems that we face. I mean, one of the reasons that I think that I can continue to make a difference and feel very strongly that now is, more of a time to make a difference than ever, is because we see a systematic effort by the Trump administration to tear down not only environmental protection, but privacy protections, health protections, consumer protections, you name it, whether it's Dodd-Frank's in the financial system, or it's the Affordable Care Act. But it's particularly egregious when it comes to the Environmental Protection Agency. As you know, he says we're going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement on climate change. He's put out an executive order that to repeal the Clean Power Act under President Obama, dealing with air pollution. He has systematically trying to tear down the Clean Water Act. We passed, and I was actually the sponsor of a bill called TSCA, which tries to protect against toxic material in almost everything, your cleaning products, almost everything you use, and he hasn't really implemented that. So the main thing is, if we were able to take the majority in November, and the Democrats were in the majority, we would simply pass laws to overrule these various executive orders that President Trump has put in place to try to tear down the environment. And it couldn't come any sooner. Now, some of these things that he does by executive order end up being struck down in the courts because the environmental groups sue and they end up not becoming law. But he is systematically tearing down every environmental protection. Probably the one that we hear about most now is drilling off the coast here, drilling for oil and natural gas off the coast of New Jersey. And we could certainly put a stop to that through congressional action if we were in the majority.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
I completely agree with Representative Pallone about his stance on what President Donald Trump is doing, and as well as what can be done to prevent further environmental damage to our country. Now, I would also say that if the federal government is at the point where it wants to kill our environment and continue to pump up more climate change and more global warming, and continue taking money and listening to the fossil fuel industry, then it's up to the states and the local governments to continue to make it best to be environmentally friendly within these districts. Now, I remember when President Donald Trump, when he pulled out of the Paris Accords, a lot of states and a lot of cities and municipalities decided to enter into the Paris Accords themselves, meaning that the population within those districts will be more environmentally friendly than what President Donald Trump wants us to be. We cannot continue to live off of fossil fuels. It is an outdated and antiquated way for us to live off of energy. We have to look towards wind energy, solar energy, hydroelectricity. It's not that hard, honestly. Like, look at the Bayshore and look at the shore itself and see that we have enough power for wind energy and hydroelectricity. But it also comes from congressional leadership as well. The way that our environment is run, we don't even know how to recycle. I've seen in Germany and in other European countries where there's 6 different cans for people to recycle in. We don't have that system here. With the way that we recycle is by putting everything in a plastic bag and then sending it to the place for them to recycle it. It's not enough, and we need to do better with recycling. We need to make sure that we're not using plastic. There's so many different ways that we can circumvent the environmental damage to our country, and it doesn't just come from federal leadership. But if I were elected in Congress, there are enough ways that we can shore up environmental damage to our country.
Thank you. Keeping on the topic of the environment, Mr. Walker, you get to answer this first. Would you move to reauthorize the funding of the Superfund regulations?
Yes, I would reauthorize that. I believe that with the way the Superfund tax structure is now, that the corporations do not give money back to the federal government if they are dumping onto our property for the federal government, or wherever they're dumping at, they're not making sure that they pay for the damage to our environment. I think with the Superfund tax structure, where tax dollars are being raised to be able to support the environmental damage done by these corporations, I think that the taxpayers should not be burdened with that, and that the corporations should financially fix what they've been doing to our environment.
Pallone.
Thank you. So the Superfund and brownfields are actually within the jurisdiction of my committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, but back in '94 when Gingrich became the speaker and the Republicans took the majority, they refused to reauthorize the Superfund. And the Superfund is basically a tax on the oil and chemical industry to pay for cleanup of these sites. Ever since then, there's been no Superfund tax, effectively no Superfund, on the oil and chemical industry, and so the cleanup's been financed with your tax dollars, you know, basically what you pay in your income tax, which is not the way to do it. I have a bill that would reinstitute the Superfund tax on the oil and chemical industry. That's the way it should be, but the Republicans won't do it. We'd have to be in the majority, and then we'd pass a bill in our committee. We did pass in the omnibus budget bill, the budget bill at the end of last year, a reauthorization of the brownfields. Brownfields are the lesser toxic waste sites, and so we do have a reauthorization of the brownfields program, which again is something that I sponsored in our committee, and so we have that money over the next few years. But we do need to reauthorize the Superfund, because without that tax, you're paying for it out of your tax dollars, which I don't think is right.
Okay. Next question. And Mr. Pallone, you'll be answering this first. What are your thoughts on improving both maternity and paternity leave for new parents?
Well, I would definitely support paid maternity leave, you know, both for the mothers as well as for the dads. Right now, you know, at the federal level, it's unpaid for. So, you know, it's really not that helpful if you can take time off, but you don't get paid. So I think that there are a whole series of things that we could do if we were in the majority that would, you know, help families, not only paid family leave, but certainly more in terms of childcare, certainly more in terms of education, because people can't increasingly afford to pay for college education. I was very much supportive of Hillary Clinton's idea and President Obama's idea of free community college. And then if you were, I guess under her plan, if you were making below $250,000 for a family of four, the federal government would pay for 4 years tuition at a public university like Rutgers. So there are a lot more things that we need to be done to help families, and certainly paid leave would be one of them.
Mr. Walker.
I fully support in following other leading countries amongst the world and be able to pass maternal and paternal care for parents. I think with the way that childcare and how expensive it is nowadays, that we need to pass, again, HR 676, which is a Medicare for All bill. If we had a Medicare for All bill, then we will have enough money to be able to make sure that mothers could get up to 15 weeks for maternal care, and dads can get up to 8 weeks for paternal care. It's followed among many countries within the European Union and Europe in general. It seems as though that we're too antiquated and outdated with our model of how to provide paternal and maternal care to our children, but we can always change it. If there's new leadership and there's not the same playbook from the Washington insiders, then we can actually pass this bill. It's definitely needed, and childcare is way too expensive for us to continue having our kids being babysitted and sent to places where it's costing even more than the cost of college now. It's too expensive, and the best way to do it is to pass the HR 676 and be able to provide maternal and paternal care.
Okay. I again would like to urge the audience, because the questions are coming from you. Candidates want to know your concerns, what issues are most important to you, and we can use some more questions. We still have some time left, so please keep writing on. If you need cards, raise your hand, and we'll be around to give you the cards. I do have one other question, so while you're doing the questions, it's again dealing with health care, and say, Mr. Walker, you will be going first, and it states, if elected, what is a way that you would lower health coverage costs? In a job, in general, lower the cost for health care.
So I think healthcare costs are too expensive. A lot of people can't afford their premiums. A lot of people can't even meet their deductibles. Whether they go to the doctor and go to the emergency room, they come back with a bill that's $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for medical procedures that aren't even as expensive as the bill says. Something where you go to the doctor and you get a gastro done, it might cost $20,000, but if you go to Canada or you go to Mexico or you go to Costa Rica or Germany, it might be 10% of the price. It's a profit-driven system that clearly favors the shareholders and the CEOs and does not benefit the people that pay for the services. The way that I would cut the costs is supporting HR 676. These questions keep coming up because we don't have a social health insurance program. Many other countries have these kind of programs for the people. They pay their taxes, they go get whatever they need done, they get prescription drugs at lower cost than what we do. It's ridiculous to believe that we pay the highest insurance costs, and it's ridiculous to believe that we pay the highest amount of money for prescription drugs. These laws are written by corporate lobbyists, corporations, and the executives in order for them to make the most money off of us. And the way that I would cut costs is by passing the same health insurance program that are offered by other leading countries in the world.
Thank you.
Well, in terms of prescription drugs, the two easiest ways of bringing costs down is one, you would have the federal government negotiate prices under Medicare. In other words, right now, within the VA system, within the veterans system, within the military, the government actually negotiates to bring prices down. You could do the same thing with Medicare, and that would really make a big difference. The other thing you can do is you can basically allow importation of drugs. So if somebody wants to buy a drug from Canada or another country that's less, they can have it imported here. Both of those things are now prohibited by federal law, so we need to change that. In terms of the Affordable Care Act, I just want to give an idea of what President Trump has done. First of all, he tried to repeal it unsuccessfully. Then he eliminated the individual mandate as part of the tax bill. If people are not required to have health insurance anymore, what's going to happen over the next few years is more young people and people that are healthy simply won't buy insurance, and then the cost goes up for everyone else. So that needs to be changed. The other thing he did is eliminate the cost-sharing subsidies. So many people now who got help paying for their co-pays or the deductibles have lost that. And so those out-of-pocket expenses are now going through the roof. And then the other thing he did was to say that you can buy insurance that doesn't have an essential benefit package. So you can buy insurance that doesn't have hospitalization. You can buy insurance that doesn't have maternal care or pediatric care, which means junk insurance. So all those things need to be changed. And my bill, the Modernization Act, would basically change all that. And then it would also provide more of a subsidy for people who get a subsidy, and it would allow people who don't get a subsidy now to get one by raising the cap or eliminating the cap on the subsidy to help you pay for your premium. So these are some of the things that we could do to make a difference and bring down costs.
Thank you. Next question, and Mr. Pallone, you get to answer this one first. School shootings have only appeared to increase across the nation, a problem no other country has. What changes to gun control would you propose?
Well, the three most important things, one is universal background check. Right now, something like 40% of the guns are purchased either at gun shows, because you don't have to have a background check, or over the internet for the same reason. You have to have a background check. So you have to have a universal background check, and the federal law should reflect that. Secondly, we have to bring back a ban on assault weapons. We had it until maybe, 10, 20 years ago. And then again, that was one of the things when Gingrich and the Republicans took the majority, they let it expire. So you have to bring that back. And then you have to have a limitation on the number of rounds of ammunition. Now, there are a lot of other things, but those three are really the most important. And I would stress, too, that it's not just these mass shootings. I mean, we have individual shootings every day. Within a week, I guess, of Parkland, we had a 10-year-old in Asbury Park, which is one of the towns that I represent, who was shot on the street and killed. So these three things that I mentioned don't just relate to the mass shootings, they relate to the gun violence in general that we face every day in every community. It's not a phenomenon of urban areas, it's a phenomenon of the whole country, and we need to have at least these three sensible solutions, if not more.
Mr. Walker.
I absolutely agree with the representative that we have to mandate universal background checks for private and public sellers of guns. I believe that we should also ban bump stocks and bring back the assault weapons ban, which my opponent did vote yes on. However, I believe that the ban should not have expired, and I know that there were Democratic majorities within Congress over the last 15 plus years for them to bring back the assault weapons ban. So I'd just like to ask the congressional leadership as to why they did not do so. Now, with that said, we also have to think about why these kids are doing this. It's a mental health issue, but we also have to be able to raise the minimum purchasing age from 18 to 21, which is usually when people are mentally capable of making independent decisions. Again, we have to ban bump stocks, but we also have to make sure that we look at the Constitution. The Second Amendment is debated today as to whether gun rights are able for citizens or whether it's some murky definition of what gun rights are. But we need to make sure that we decide what gun rights are. Are all citizens able to have guns? Are some citizens able to have guns? Mentally able individuals are able to have guns, but people that are mentally ill, we're not able to buy guns until President Trump allowed some kind of rule that lets mentally disabled people be able to buy guns. This can't be allowed. There are so many people that are dying every day because there's not a concrete definition over who can buy guns. We need to pass a constitutional amendment that says who can buy guns and who cannot buy guns. We need to make assault weapons less accessible to people or just ban them outright. But we need to get a grip on gun legislation because we cannot keep sending our kids to school every day and not knowing if they're going to come back or not.
Thank you. Okay, next question, and Mr. Walker, you get to answer this first, and it states, what is your stance on union rights that could be threatened by the current AISCME versus Janus case? And what legislation would you pass to strengthen union rights?
So I believe that union rights are very important, and I know that through the last long time that union rights have been important to the auto industry, airport workers, grocery store workers, teachers. It's very important for employees to have union rights because without union rights, anybody is eligible to be fired on the spot at any job. And I think that with people that know that they have protection, while some people might take advantage of tenure and union rights that allows them to stay in jobs, but it's an added protection. And I would pass legislation that makes it mandatory for a lot of industries that people work in to have those union rights. There are too many executives and too many big wigs and corporations that want to fire people left and right, but if people have the added protection that they are able to work where they work, then we'll have safer places to work in and people will be much happier where they work.
I'd be very concerned about what the Supreme Court is going to do in that case. The problem that you have is you have all these states now, mostly in the South and the West, but there are others too, that they call them right-to-work states. And basically what they say is that you can't have a union shop. In other words, people, if you have a union shop, which we have in New Jersey, then it means that if there's a union that is representing the shop or that particular industry, then you all have to pay dues, or at least pay into the fund that the union uses in order to protect your rights. And basically what may happen in this Supreme Court case is that they would throw that out and say that you can't require people to pay their dues even if the group has collectively decided to become part of a union. That really is going to disrupt the ability for unions to organize and to make sure that your rights are protected. So you need to pass legislation to say that you can have essentially a union shop and you can have PLA agreements and that states can't prevent that. In addition, what's happening with the Trump administration is that they're not only systematically trying to tear down union rights, but also not fund and enforce the law. So you find with OSHA, which deals with occupational safety, that the Trump administration is trying to cut back on the funding for it or the enforcement of OSHA laws. So again, people wouldn't be protected in the workplace. They would be injured and they would have no recourse. So if we take the majority, or I should say when, because I think we will, we're going to have to shore up all these things and overturn a lot of the executive orders that the president has put forward that basically watered down union rights and union protection, just as he's done with the environment and healthcare and Wall Street and everything else.
Thank you. The next question again deals with the environment. And it says, with local failures to assure the quality of potable water, would you support a federal standard or federal oversight of local water suppliers? And Mr. Pallone answers first.
Well, one of the bills that I mentioned, and we might actually get it passed in this session in Congress, but if not, we try to do it next time, is an upgrade of the Safe Drinking Water Act, which again is within our committee's jurisdiction. Safe Drinking Water Act is the funding mechanism that federal dollars that go to the states to upgrade drinking water supplies. The best example would be in Flint, Michigan, where, they diverted the water supply and people were drinking polluted water. So if we can get this passed in the bill that I've sponsored, it will not only mean more money to towns like Perth Amboy, but also a higher level of standards. Perfect example, as I mentioned before, I don't remember, I guess it was about a year ago, when Perth Amboy got some money to upgrade their underground pipes, and we went out with the mayor and witnessed one of the projects. But a lot more could be done. And I think some of you know that we've had problems with drinking fountains in schools. And in New Brunswick, for example, they actually had to shut down all the drinking fountains in the schools because they found out that they were contaminated. And then they paid, it cost them about $10,000 or $20,000 to upgrade them all. So this bill also has money to upgrade and give money back to schools to upgrade the drinking fountains. So those are some of the things that we could do. We might actually get this passed in this session, even with the Republicans. It came out of my committee. But if we don't get it passed, then we would certainly try to do it as part of the majority next year.
I say that we need to fix the water pipes immediately. It's ridiculous to believe that we can bomb Syria every day and send drones to kill terrorists out in the Middle East, but we can't even afford to fix Flint water pipes. It's been years since Flint water crisis has begun, and people still don't have adequate drinking water out there. And when they go to the private market, you have the companies like Poland Spring or Aquafina that charge $10 a water bottle. It's ridiculous that people that don't even have safe drinking water from the municipalities, the same municipalities that are run kind of like monopolies, they can't even go to the private market and be able to get safe drinking water because they can't even afford it. This is definitely not happening within the high upper middle class suburbs. These are definitely happening within the poorer areas where people don't have any choice and no option. If we work towards fixing our water pipes, then everyone will have safe drinking water. Now, I remember when I was a kid in Linden, New Jersey, there were numerous times where there were contaminants in the water and they had to shut it down. What are parents and kids supposed to do when they can't even drink safe drinking water? Are they supposed to refer to the private market? We cannot continue to wait for Congress to do something, but if we don't have the right leadership, things are not going to happen now.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. Mr. Pallone, you get to answer this first, is name up to 3 people who you admire or who have inspired you and tell us why.
I don't know, I hate these questions. Because I always think half an hour later, I had a better response. Well, first of all, I'll say I've admired greatly President Obama. We worked with him to get a lot of progressive legislation passed. Of course, the most important probably was the Affordable Care Act. But even on, one of the things that really disturbs me about Trump is his foreign policy, which we haven't really talked about much. I cringed when Trump said that he should be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, when all he does is to create a situation where war is more likely than peace. And President Obama did the Iran agreement, which was probably the reason he got the Nobel Peace Prize. And then, of course, Trump proceeds to withdraw from it. Who else? I always liked Thomas Jefferson. I know he was a slave owner, but I think that he did. I just loved his writings, the Declaration of Independence, and all the different things he did as president to make America a better country. All right, you want a third one? Okay, can I think of as third? How about Albert Einstein? I always admire him because he was so brilliant and he did so much to advance science in our country, which I still think is so important. I think that we need to do so much more to encourage STEM education in this country. And I'd like to use him as sort of an example of where our country could be if we get more and more young people, and provide scholarships so that we can have more people go into STEM education, so we continue to be sort of the leader on science and technology. And half an hour later, I'll think of 3 other people.
Thank you.
One of my influences, the first one would be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I believe with what he was working towards with civil disobedience and working with people in the South and all over the rest of the country and trying to improve civil rights in the times that they were with segregation and Jim Crow laws, I think that he did a lot for the people, whether they were union workers, whether they were people working in restaurants, or just people that needed to know that the government and other people around the world cared for them. Along with that, I believe that President Barack Obama is also a great influence on me. For him able to tear down a lot of racial barriers and for him to become the first black president in the United States, I think that he did a lot of good for the country, regardless of what a lot of critics say. I think that he definitely improved race relations. For people that were born in the 1920s and 1930s who never believed that they would ever see a black US president, I believe that there were a lot of tears shed that day when Barack Obama won the presidential election. So for that and the way that he did his job with grace versus what we have now, I think that he's definitely an influence that I can say I'm happy to look up to. Now the third person I would say is actually my grandfather. With the way that my grandfather helped raise me and helped raise my family, I think that with the way that he's also cool, calm, and collected with nothing ever bothering him, that's a way that I kind of live my life. It's a way where you're much happier than worrying about the things around you. And it's an easy way for you to really deal with society and everything else around you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, I think this is a good time to move to the last part of the program, which is the 3-minute closing statement. And we're going in the reverse order of the opening statement. So Mr. Walker, you get to say your 3 minutes.
So once again, I'd like to thank Representative Pallone for agreeing to meet with me tonight and debating. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and the Portuguese Sporting Club for facilitating this debate, and also to all of you for coming and listening to us speak tonight. Tonight you have heard key issues affecting all of us and how I and my opponent will work towards solving this issue should either of us be elected into Congress. And I hope that our differing solutions will help you in your choice for deciding who you want to represent you. Contrary to what Washington insiders say, Congress is broken. My opponent has been re-elected 14 times within this district. He has promised that healthcare is a right, the rich and wealthy will pay their fair share in taxes, and that there should be more government transparency. Despite 30 years of these promises and more, there has still not been enough done to combat these issues. I like to ask, what are the odds that the pharmaceutical companies that kill our people every day and pump up drug prices are the same companies that donate to my opponent? What are the chances that companies that ship jobs overseas like Amazon and Microsoft and Johnson Controls and Carrier Clinic are the same ones donating into politicians that say that they want to keep jobs in America? What are the odds that my opponent has never co-sponsored Medicare for All or publicly stated that he will co-sponsor the bill, yet takes money from the insurance companies that prioritize profit over people? Our laws are written not by the people that we elect, but by who the corporations and the lobbyists elect. If you believe that Congress is working and you are happy with what you are getting, then vote for that. However, if you are looking for a change and you want new solutions and fresh ideas and fresh blood in Congress to really shake things up and for you to make you feel like you are being represented, then I ask for your vote. I'm running in this district because your needs have not been met, and despite my opponent being a trusted name within this district, I decided to run for office because I know that you deserve better than what you are getting from Washington. Not only do I know what people of CD6 need, but I live it as well. I experience crumbling infrastructure every day when I go into the tunnels of Manhattan. I know the amount of taxes that it takes and the amount of money that you need to make in order to live in New Jersey. And I know that you are having higher insurance premiums by profit-based healthcare insurance companies. You've been promised so many things through the decades that you still have not seen. And if you are tired of the lies and false promises, it is your turn to make that change. And I come to you as an option, and I'm asking for your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Pallone.
Thank you. It's difficult because I don't like to criticize my opponent because I really think that the change that we need is to have a Democratic majority in Congress. We're both Democrats. If you listened, you probably realize there wasn't much of a difference between us on most of the issues. And I think the real problem in Washington right now is President Trump and a Republican Congress that is not responding to America's need. And so the change that we need really is to change the party that's in charge in both the House of Representatives and also in the Senate. Because otherwise we're going to see this constant effort by the Trump administration and the Republican leadership in Congress to basically try to tear down every progressive piece of legislation or statute that we have in place, whether it's on the environment or healthcare or protecting against financial ruin. The list goes on. But I really do believe that I can continue to make a difference, and probably there's no better time for me to do that because being in a position of leadership, and I'd be the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, most of what we've talked about tonight comes under the jurisdiction of that committee. We deal with the environment, healthcare, energy, consumer issues, the internet, communications, the list goes on. And I think I would be in a great position as the chairman of the committee to try to reverse all these terrible things that we've talked about tonight that the Trump administration has done and move towards a progressive agenda on things like infrastructure to create jobs and improve the economy. And so the opportunity to make a difference, it would really be there. And I think that, I hate to say it because I like young people. I kind of see my own kids looking at you here tonight. But I also realize, and I think you all need to realize that, the seniority system is still in place. The longer you've been there, the more ability you have to get things done. And certainly being the chairman of the Committee, Energy and Commerce, which has jurisdiction over 60% of what we do in the House of Representatives, could really make a big difference for our district and for the state of New Jersey. So I would ask you to send me back, but I do appreciate the fact that we had this debate tonight, and I do want to thank the League and all the local representatives. And I was going to say, Yvonne, if we had any state questions, I was going to refer them to you, but the League forbade us to do that, so you didn't have to answer anything tonight. But thank you again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And at this time, I think we owe the candidates a round of applause. I do want to remind you that the primary is on June 5th. The polls open at 6 a.m. and close at 8 p.m. In order to vote in the Democratic primary, you must be a registered Democrat, or as an independent, when you go up to the desk, you state you want to be a Democrat, and they will give you the pink card, and you may vote at that time. The League of Women Voters has some literature on the desk on your way out. You may want to pick it up about things you need to know on Election Day, and 3 ways to make voting a breeze. And just a plug for the State League of Women Voters, in the fall, we do a project called Vote 411, and if you type in your street address, you will get all the candidates for whom you can vote for. These candidates will have been asked questions, and they hopefully will respond to those questions, and you can read them, and you can compare the candidates at that time for the general election. And thank you very much for coming and being good citizens, active citizens.